For most Black Americans, especially those in the South, the front porch isn't just part of the entry into the house. It is the place we enter community. It's not just the comfort or safety we experience there, but it's where we do some people watching and good reflection. On the front porch is where we tell the truth with a little sweetener and an awesome time along the way. We take what we learn and we act. On this episode, we discuss all things related to youth, education, community, and the politics of people.
Hey, good people, and welcome back to another episode of On the Front Porch with KaCey. So last week we got into some heavy stuff, right? We did. We talked a lot about really understanding the dynamics of how school was structured for Black folks. We got a little bit into the Freedmen's Bureau. We talked about some statistics as it relates to school districts in the Metro Atlanta area. Today, I want to carry on that theme just a little bit more. This week, I've been preparing and I've been dropping little breadcrumbs on my social media about a really big opportunity that we're about to partake in this coming Tuesday and Wednesday. And it involves some of our young people, really all of our young people. And, it just has me thinking, how are people going to receive the announcement when we make it? Because I do understand that folks still have a very knee-jerk type of response or reaction when we describe the young men that we work with, the demographic of our participants. And I want to get a little bit into it and carry on with these themes that Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois was writing about, at the early 20th century, the early 1900s. Christopher J.H. Wright wrote that causes of poverty include laziness and oppression. And I struggle with that because when I see the young people that I work with, laziness is the furthest thing from what it is that they are. I wouldn't use that word to describe them. Again, anytime someone is going to run up and down the street in 90 and 100 degree weather for hours upon hours, that's not laziness, right? But a lot of times, because the things that we hope that they would be motivated by, they aren't, and they choose not to participate in those things, we think that they're lazy. We think that they don't want to go and work in a way that is, I guess, quote unquote, respectable, right? In a way that is palatable for those of us who were reared and really conditioned to show up in a way that other people could accept. And this generation of young people, that's not what they're doing. They're not doing that. They're showing up in a way that looks good for them. When I look at the piece about oppression from the writings of Christopher Wright, really for me, I think there's something to be said about his summation that the root cause really is humanity, or the lack of humanity that we have when we look at people who come from socioeconomic communities or neighborhoods or levels, right, that aren't our own. But here's where we must be careful, because humanity doesn't always denote something positive, right? Humanity is how we look at people. We would hope that when we say that, we want to be humane, it is, again, for me, it brings up this connotation of the word tolerant. And y'all know, I've told y'all before, shout out to Mr. Gary Turner, we tolerate those things that we eventually want to get rid of. We'll put up with it until we don't have to anymore. And so sometimes when we say that there needs to be humane treatment, it's like, what's the bare minimum that we have to do so that people don't write us off as, uncaring and, unempathetic and just callous, when it comes to other people. Oftentimes when we speak of the humanity of people, it's because it is rare that it is the very thing that causes something positive to occur, right? It is our humanity that generally prompts us to consider ourselves only or primarily. And I do believe that Wright kind of sums up my sentiments well around the exploitation of others by those whose own selfish interests are served by keeping others poor. And, I sometimes wonder, why can't we fix this issue of poverty in our communities? Now, y'all know, faith is important to me. And so we talk about this scripture that the poor will be with us always, right? We've heard that before. And one of the scriptures that you find for that is Matthew 26:11. But I cringe for two reasons when I hear that, because one, it's a poor excuse, and two, it is out of context a lot of times in how we use it. And this is not a Bible study or a lesson, but it is, I think, relative to the rest of this conversation that I'm going to say, because the remainder of the scripture says, but you will not have me always. And so what was happening was that Jesus was admonishing the disciples who felt that it was wasteful that this woman would pour out her expensive perfume on his feet when she was in such need. And the fact that the disciples looked past why she was doing what she was doing and focused on what she was doing connects deeply with the rationale that I have around the experience that we see others in poverty, especially in these urban areas, and how that impacts our youth in regards to education and future success. In order to find ways to influence a better or different outcome for them, we don't focus on why families are living in impoverished conditions. We focus too much attention on what they are doing as a result of that poverty. But in the end, for those of us that are connecting with a Christian faith or a spiritual practice that allows us to care for others, it does tell us to care for the poor, right? It tells us to care for those who are impoverished. And then tradition and experience also helps to inform our decisions on how we care for those in need. A lot of times it is just give them what it is we think that they should need. Give them what it is we really want them to have. One, to help make us feel better about the situation. But two, it also is just enough to remind them of the situation that they're in. And so subconsciously, right, it's almost as if society wants to keep these people humble in the sense of, be grateful that there's even a program or organization or somebody that wants to do something for you. How dare you not be grateful? And it reminds me of the time where, for my 35th birthday, I wanted to give back. And so myself and a couple of friends, we packed sandwiches to go give them to folks that were living on Peachtree and Pine at that time. For those who are in Atlanta and you're familiar with what Peachtree and Pine kind of triggers or conjures up for you. Well, this man was asking for mayonnaise and mustard. And when we was getting ready to give him drinks, he said he didn't want water. Why didn't we have something else? Now, someone else could have said, well, be grateful that you got something to begin with. But what I understood and what I understand now, even when people sometimes wonder, why do you do what you do for these young men when they ask the way that they ask? Because a lot of times when you have nothing, all you have left is your pride. And if someone is going to take that and then trample all over and step on it and remind you that you have nothing, then when you literally feel as though you have no pride of self, even in the area of being able to ask for the type of drink that you want to consume, what purpose is there left to live for? If there's nothing that you can hold on to that helps to really encourage your own self-confidence and your own self-esteem, what is there left to live for? And so I want us to think about that, right? I want us to be careful in trying to keep people so humble and make them be so grateful for what it is that we're doing for them, that we realize that for some of them, that literally is the last thing that they have that they can call their own. So as we talk about this and how poverty plays a part, right? Elijah Anderson really talked about this idea of the ghetto is where Black people live. He goes through this whole, just series of if-thens. And he starts with when white people see a Black stranger in public, they associate them with the ghetto, with lower class status, with criminality, violence, and poverty. And then middle class Black people may overcome the stigma by emulating the upper class and providing proof of address. We see that a lot. Working class Black people are unable to escape the stigma and discrimination. But eventually what happens is that it all goes back to the ghetto acts as a reference point to interpret Black identity. Now, y'all can sit here and say, well, that's not true. That's not my story. That's not my life. Kudos to you. Round of applause. Happy that you were able to either make it out or you never had to experience this to begin with. But like I said before, it goes back to even 1903 when W.E.B. Du Bois says that the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. And I'd venture to say that it is still the problem in the 21st century. Now, people can say all day, well, we had our first Black president. And y'all know I love me some forever President Barack Obama and my forever First Lady, Michelle Obama, but y'all can miss me with the fact that there's no longer any racism or prejudice or color line issues just because they let us have our first Black president. And for some of y'all Black folks, y'all quick to remind us that he ain't even all Black, but we're going to save that whole one drop rule for another conversation, right? The earlier 20th century talks about how Blacks migrated from the rural South to the cities throughout the U.S., right? And then even in 1920, when Marcus Garvey held an international convention in Harlem, which at that time was one of the Black meccas in this country. Then we moved to the 1960s where there was white flight from areas in the U.S. where Black people lived, leading to Black ghettos. Now, the word ghetto is not something that Americans created, right? If I'm not mistaken, the word ghetto itself derives from, I think, an Italian word, right? I believe so. I believe it's an Italian word. I could be wrong. But it really talked about these tenements, right? These apartments, these housing units, these dwellings that were in close quarters, and they went up in the sky so that you were able to pack more people in them. And that is where we found a lot of folks who were working class or poor. They found themselves living there. And did y'all know that Atlanta was one of the first places to have these city funded housing development? So when you hear people talk about Herndon Homes, Carver Homes, Techwood, right? These were places that housed the majority of Black folks that were essentially living in the hood. And so the idea of having to walk through life with folks already assuming they know who you are, what you are, how you're going to respond, has a lot to do with what they can associate or put their finger on in terms of, oh, I know what that means. You're from the west side of Atlanta. I can pretty much sum up what I think your life is about. Now, we know that is changing, right? You can't just make that assumption anymore because people are taking advantage of opportunities to purchase land, to purchase homes. And, we move forward that way. But it still gives you an idea of what to think. I say that because even when I talk about the work that I do, and I said, well, I serve Black male youth on the west side of Atlanta. It's like, oh, it's like that. I mean, you know how when people say, oh, like they immediately understand who you're talking about without you having to say anything else. Well, let me back up a little bit, because sometimes I throw these names out of sociologists and y'all are wondering, who are they? Elijah Anderson was actually a man who was born on a plantation in Mississippi during World War II. His parents were originally sharecroppers who picked cotton, but after his father's experience of fighting as a soldier in Europe during the war, the family found racism of the South, right, intolerable, and moved to Chicago and then Indiana, both, right, we know are in the North. He studied sociology at Indiana University and then in Chicago, where he did his dissertation on Black street corner men. And his first book became A Place on the Corner. Now, it's important that I mention that because we're going to talk about this corner in a moment. He was also the vice president of the American Sociological Association, and he's won many awards, right? Okay. So this idea of the corner when it comes to the ghetto, when it comes to folks in the hood, have you ever noticed that if you ride through some of the more affluent neighborhoods, wherever you live, you don't see people gathered on the corner? Right? Have you noticed that? Like, by and large, just think about it. When you ride through wealthy neighborhoods, upper middle class, even middle class neighborhoods, you don't see people gathered on the corner. Now, for me, that gathering is sentimental, right? Because I tell people all the time, I didn't grow up wanting for much. My family was far from rich. And I think we were able to be more than just okay because of where my mother chose to raise her family. You know, my dad was born in 1926 in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. My mom was born in 1945 in what was at that time called Princess Anne County, Virginia, which is now Virginia Beach, Virginia. And my mother was born in the house that she grew up in. And that house was passed down to my grandmother, whose grandmother also had it. And so it had been in our family for generations, and it still is. Well, my daddy eventually bought a small house across the street from where my mother literally was born and raised in. And he built around the house and built it to fit his family needs. But except for maybe about 4 years of my mother's entire life combined, she's always lived on that street. And it was a working class neighborhood. I wouldn't even call it middle class. Folks had to get up and had to go to work. They, worked what would not necessarily be called professional jobs in terms of the bulk of folks, but people were hardworking. They owned their homes. They took care of their families. But the reason I bring that up is because we gathered on the corner. We gathered on the street. We gathered on the block, right? Like some of my fondest memories is growing up and riding my bicycle in between the cars, right? I see my cousins and my brothers, washing their cars, waxing their cars, their girlfriends, maybe sitting on the curb or on top of the car, whatnot, and music is blasting from the trunks, and people just knew to come and, cruise down the street in Beechwood, and then somebody would fire up a grill, or we could play hopscotch without worrying about cars flying down the street. And then, be some stuff that would pop off sometimes at night, or whatnot. And so we realized that we just had to make do with what we had, and we made the most of it, and we were family, even for those of us who did not share DNA. So when I see young people who are gathered on corners, when I see young people who are, gathered in neighborhoods, for me, it's nostalgic because I understand the bonds that were created and formed and strengthened. I understood the protection that we gave each other from being together on the corners. I understood that for some people, being outside was safer than it was being at home. But a lot of times now what we see is that when people are gathered together outside, especially Black male youth, we're wondering, what are they up to? What did they just finish getting, out of? What are they headed into? Right? It's too many of them. There are laws that are passed all across the city, and not just our city, and I mean just cities in this country, where if it's more than a certain number of people, right? Let's just be fair, people, then it is cause to call them a gang, and then officers can go and by law disband that group. But not understanding that for them, it is just a natural bonding ritual and experience to know that this is where we can come and we can have some level of reassurance of who is going to be there. So as Elijah Anderson talks about this iconic ghetto, is what he called it, even in 2012, he argued that many Americans associate the ghetto with a place where Black people live. Said that already, right? But he goes on to say it is the same Americans that the ghetto symbolizes: a lawless, impoverished, drug-infested, chaotic area of the city ruled by violence. So when they think of Black people, they imagine them as immoral, drug-addicted criminal hoods deserving of prejudice and discrimination. He gives the example of a racist incident when he was on holiday in a pleasant, what he calls a pleasant, Cape Cod town full of upper middle class white vacationers. And as he enjoyed a jog through the town, a middle-aged white man blocked the road with his car and shouted, "Go home." Bemused, Anderson later questioned what that meant, and he realized that in order to go home, he had to go home to the ghetto. The institution of the ghetto is persistent, says Anderson, and is a person's place, and that the Black person's place is most often in the ghetto, not in middle class society. Again, we know that that is not true, but that is the conversation that happens subconsciously, even amongst Black people, y'all. I am learning, to see stuff on Facebook and to keep scrolling. It is hard sometimes. There's a boom of real estate happening here in Atlanta. And, I've had folks say to me, "Oh, well, I got mine, go get yours." Or, "I got mine, I'm not concerned about who can't get theirs." And that they are excited because they're developing their own personal wealth, which is fine. But it's also at the expense of people who've been fighting to keep their homes and lost them under, unfortunate circumstances. And I just can't wrap my mind around people who are okay with being conscious of someone else's misfortune in an effort to make $1. I was talking to some of my friends that I do this work with, and we were saying that there's nothing wrong with making money in whatever it is you choose to do, be it in community, be it in academia, be it in the corporate world, entertainment, even in religion. There's nothing wrong with making money and making a lot of it for you to be able to take care of your family. The problem is when you're willing to take advantage of the least of these in order to do it. And so I tell folks all the time, I don't know what people think of me by the sheer number of requests that I get for money. People really think that I have a lot of it, and I don't. And I probably could have more, but I refuse to do it on the backs of the young people that I serve. I refuse to throw them under the bus for the sake of $1. I just won't do it. And so while we are moving and we're trying our hardest to move past this idea that when people see us and they see what part of the city we may live in, that they automatically think that they know who we are, that we are still in this race to be accepted, right, by society. And a lot of times to be accepted by society, we have to have a certain status quo. We have to have a certain type of, dollar in our pockets in order for us to be respected, in order for us to be looked at as someone who isn't going back to the ghetto when they tell us to go home. And so all of that is about us making sure that when we see these young Black men on corners, that we don't immediately think of immoral and criminal behavior. Maybe they're just young people gathering together to strengthen the bonds of brotherhood and friendship and found family, right? To ensure that for some of them, when outside is safer than at home, that they have a place they can go to and know someone that I'm familiar with is going to come. And whatever I'm experiencing is going to be made just a little bit better because I have somebody that I can lean on when they get to this corner. And so I'm excited because I can't wait to tell y'all all that is about to happen next week. It is exciting. It is going to debunk some myths that people still carry about these young Black folks. It is going to have some people saying, oh, well, maybe we should have paid just a little bit more attention to what they had going on. It's going to have some folks applauding and saying, we knew it and they did it and they accomplished it and they're going to be rooting us on. And it's going to introduce us to a whole nother world of folks who really just thought we were doing just enough to keep yet one more Black boy out of jail, but not making sure that we set them up to be successful for life. So as you go about your day and as you continue to think through how you show up and how you respond when it comes to Black male youth, wherever you may reside, don't make the assumption that you know exactly what kind of person they are simply because of their zip code, right? I used to say that a lot, that, we should not dictate what kind of experience these young people should have simply by their zip code. It's totally unfair because what if someone summed up your entire life because of your address, right? And doing this work in equity, what I realized is that beyond just STEM work, just beyond entrepreneurial training, beyond mentoring, what we're really doing is lessening the effects of poverty for these youth in Atlanta. And we're also along the way demanding investment from the powers that be, and for them to know that we have to do this together. So I continue to be grateful for those that do this work alongside me, who push me on to continue to do this work when I'm ready to give up. Not because the children are hard, not because the young people make it hard. It really is the adults, y'all. It really be these grown people out here that make it extremely hard to do this work because they don't believe that inherently all of our children are worth the investment. Or that all of our children have been given the same opportunity, because they haven't. And if they've been given the opportunity, who's been there to guide them along the way? And so, yeah, there are going to be some missteps from all of us. But we have to keep going. We have to pick up the pieces. We have to keep going. And I have made it my personal mission to ensure that we change the narrative when it comes to Black male youth in our urban cities. That when people think of them, that they no longer think of negative connotations, but they think of wonderment, and they think of curiosity, and they think of potential, and they think, I can't wait to see what's going to become of these young people. All right. So we got lots to do, and can't wait to share with you and bring you along the journey. But as I say often, if you can't do anything else, just make sure you speak well of these young folks. And I promise you that will go a long way. So we will see you next time on the front porch. Bye.